Less than 24 hours before the Men's World Cup kicks off in Qatar, the head of FIFA hits back at Western critics of the country's human rights record. Gianni Infantino said European nations should be apologising for past acts they've committed, accusing them of hypocrisy.
For what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologising for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons.
Also on the programme, the final details of a deal to help the poorest countries worst affected by climate change is being thrashed out at the UN climate talks in Egypt. Rishi Sunak promises Britain will continue to stand with Ukraine in his first visit to the country as Prime Minister. And a dramatic comeback for England against the All Blacks at Twickenham tonight. Good evening. The president of FIFA, World Football's governing body, has called Western countries hypocrites for criticising Qatar's record on human rights. Gianni Infantino was speaking ahead of the Men's Football World Cup, which kicks off tomorrow, and it comes after intense scrutiny from the West in the build-up to the tournament over issues including its treatment of women, gay rights and conditions for migrant workers. With more, here's our sports editor Dan Rowan.
Despite everything, Qatar's determined to put on a show. A celebration to mark the opening of the fan park in Doha tonight on the eve of the World Cup. But FIFA's come under fire for bringing the event here amid human rights concerns. And today the game's most powerful figure turned on his critics in an extraordinary speech.
Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker because I know what it means to be discriminated.
But that was just the start. Infantino then appearing to liken his own experience as a red-headed child of immigrants in Switzerland to the plight of gay people in the Middle East.
As a foreigner in a foreign country, as a child at school, I was bullied because I had red hair.
Qatar's been under mounting scrutiny, especially in Europe, over its treatment of migrant workers and the LGBT community, and Infantino then turned on the critics.
I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologising for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons. It's just hypocrisy.
Isn't it hypocritical to, on the one hand, say that FIFA stands for equality and non-discrimination, while at the same time supporting an event in a country which has discriminatory laws?
The only weapon that we have is this, is the ball. And we have to try with this to engage.
Infantino praised Qatar for recent labour reforms and said Europe was in no position to criticise on migrant rights, but his comments have been condemned.
I found it jaw-dropping to listen to. It really felt like it was a way to try and dismiss very legitimate human rights criticisms, to try and treat them as culture war issues rather than universal values that FIFA has committed to uphold.
As for FIFA's late U-turn with beer banned at World Cup stadia, Infantino was no less defiant.
I think personally, if for 3 hours a day you cannot drink a beer, you will survive.
Well, Gianni Infantino intended just then to hit back against this tournament's critics amid a barrage of negative headlines in the build-up. But after that remarkable hour-and-a-half-long press conference on the eve of this tournament, once again the focus is away from the football.
Organisers hope tonight's festivities will kickstart the excitement, but right now this World Cup seems more divisive than ever. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Doha.
Hopes are rising that a deal will be reached at the UN's climate summit in Egypt, which would see wealthy nations compensate developing states for the damage caused by climate change. Talks have run into an extra day as nearly 200 countries struggle to agree the next steps to tackle global warming. Our climate correspondent Justin Rolat sent this report.
It has been a day of bargaining and brinkmanship here in Egypt. The European Union said it would walk away from the talks if the final deal doesn't have ambitious targets for cutting emissions.
We want a good decision, but it's better to have no decision than a bad decision. We still believe a good decision is within reach, but all partners will have to work very hard to make that possible.
Developing countries have been demanding a fund to help pay for the loss and damage climate change is already wreaking in vulnerable countries, like the terrible floods in Pakistan this summer. As workmen began to dismantle the now empty pavilions, talks on this remained deadlocked too. Then, late afternoon, there was news of a breakthrough. Developed nations had agreed to the demands.
I am pleased and relieved because this is for the first time after 30 years that we bring into an institution what we've been calling for. And I think this is a milestone and particularly symbolic because it's happening in Africa.
The hope was agreement on loss and damage would break the logjam. But as the sun set over the conference centre tonight, a final agreement remained elusive.
Developed countries and developing nations need to come to some kind of agreement on how we're going to up ambition to make sure we cut our greenhouse gas emissions to be in line with the 1.5 temperature degree goal.
All eyes are now on Room 2. That is where the final negotiations are taking place.
Well, Justin joins us now. Negotiations are going on late into the night. Can we expect a deal tonight?
The Egyptians have said that is what they want. They say they're going to go on as long as it takes. Now, look, the good news here is we think the loss and damage deal, that deal they've waited for, the developing countries, for 30 years since these talks began in 1992, has been inked. It has been done. That would be a historic development. We are still looking, and this is a kind of a trade-off. We're still looking for more ambition now on reducing emissions, on tackling the source of climate change. So that's under debate. We also hear that some countries have brought in all sorts of additional items that they want to see through, and that is now delaying things. We're told, we speak to people, as they come out of the negotiating rooms, we stop them, we say, what's going on in there? And we hear they were quite happy about 2 or 3 hours ago. They were saying it's going quite well. They're now saying, look, this now looks as if it's going to go on all night. So we are now not expecting a deal till the morning. The good news is we're expecting a deal, but it's probably hours away. Now, just to set it in context, I've been here for 15 days and we're now more than 30 hours overdue. I and everyone else here is really looking forward for that decision to be made.
Justin, thank you. Justin Rolat there. Rishi Sunak has made a surprise trip to Ukraine, his first since becoming Prime Minister. During his visit to Kyiv, he held talks with President Zelensky and promised the UK would continue to support Ukraine as they face further attacks from Russia. He also announced £50 million in defence aid. Our political correspondent Ione Wells reports.
A warm reception on a snowy day in Kyiv.
Very good to see you. Well, there we go. Like I say, I've got my coat for later.
In footage released by the Ukrainian government and Number 10, Rishi Sunak can be seen laying flowers at a memorial for victims of the war. He met with emergency responders and announced a new package of air defence to help protect Ukrainian civilians and infrastructure from Russian airstrikes. Ukraine has faced months of intense Russian aerial attacks. Forces there say there have been 148 missile strikes on critical services, leaving 10 million people without power. The Prime Minister's main message was to confirm the UK's support for the country would continue.
As Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I'm proud of how we stood with you from the very beginning. And I'm here today to say that the United Kingdom will continue to stand with you. We will stand with you until Ukraine has won the peace and security it needs and deserves. And then we will stand with you as you rebuild your great country.
Thank you so much. President Zelensky thanked the Prime Minister for supporting his country and the dialogue they had. His visit comes after a difficult week for him and the Chancellor, who announced a range of tax rises and public spending squeezes. The UK's foreign aid and defence budgets won't go up as planned yet until the economic situation improves. Ministers blame the war in Ukraine for the dire economic situation in the UK. Opposition parties argue political decisions played a role too. There's a clear desire to avoid public fatigue with the conflict and demonstrate the positives of supporting Ukraine. An easier message to sell, perhaps, than the economic headlines they face back home. Ione Wells, BBC News.
A man staying at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre in Kent has died after becoming ill at the site. The Home Office said there was no evidence at this stage that he died of an infectious disease. The site has been criticised for overcrowding and there have been reports of diphtheria spreading there. The boss of a housing association has been sacked 4 days after a coroner found that a toddler died from exposure to mould in one of its properties. 2-year-old Awab Ishaq, who lived in Rochdale, died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition which was caused by the mould. Gareth Swarbrick apologised on Thursday but had rejected calls to step down. Our correspondent Sharon Barber reports.
Today, many from the Rochdale community came together to remember 2-year-old Awab Ishaq and to put pressure on Rochdale borough-wide housing. Since the coroner's damning verdict that the mould in Awab's family home had contributed to his death, there'd been calls for Gareth Swarbrick to go. But he refused, saying he had the full backing of the board at Rochdale borough-wide housing. But no longer. Today, the board took the decision to remove him from his post with immediate effect. In a statement, Rochdale Borough-wide Housing said our original instincts were for Gareth to stay on, to see the organisation through this difficult period and to make the necessary changes, but we all recognise that this is no longer tenable. The coroner noted that RBH had made changes as a result of the tragic death of Awab. Under new leadership, RBH will continue to embed these changes. For a family in grief, this offered some sense of justice.
The fact that RBH's chief executive had to be sacked as opposed to resign, for the family speaks volumes. However, they find it wholly unacceptable that the board expressed confidence in him in the first place. The family still feel that much more needs to be done.
A government source told the BBC that it welcomed Gareth Swarbrick's removal from office, but said Rochdale Borough-wide Housing still have very serious questions to answer. Sharon Barber, BBC News.
To sport, and with the Football World Cup yet to get underway, today the focus was on rugby of both codes. In Union, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland all played in the Autumn Nations Series. The biggest shock came in Cardiff, whilst there was an incredible draw at Twickenham. Matt Graveling reports.
England, New Zealand. A first meeting in 3 years. 82,000 spectators. Expect fireworks. England's Eddie Jones said his team wanted to light up Twickenham, but within 7 minutes, their night game had gone all black. 2 early Kiwi tries were followed by this from Rike Ioane. The visitors led by 19 in London. Mind the gap. Then with 10 minutes left, suddenly a lifeline. With the visitors down a man, Will Stewart powered home, before Freddie Stewart and a Will Stewart second completed the comeback and secured a draw. Wales have never lost against Georgia, and 2 tries from Jack Morgan settled any nerves in Cardiff. But as waves of white continue to roll forward, suddenly an upset was on. And then, 2 minutes from time, Luca McCarver's penalty was up and good. A fitting finale for a famous win. At Murrayfield, Scotland went blow for blow with Argentina. But this blow from Marcus Kremer saw the visitors reduced to 14 men. But as the game heated up, the home side kept their cool, with a total of 8 tries putting the Scots on top, 52-29. Fans in Dublin had to wait 67 minutes for a try, which saw Ireland lead Australia, only for the Wallabies to bounce straight back. But with 4 minutes left and 45 metres out, Ross Byrne's right boot secured a 12th home win in a row. Matt Graveling, BBC News.
It's been a good day for Australia in Rugby League 2 as they won both the men's and women's World Cup finals at Old Trafford. Samoa's men, who knocked England out at the semi-final stage, couldn't get past the overwhelming favourites today. Australia winning by 30 points to 10 and claiming their third consecutive World Cup title. Now, before we go, Laura Kunsberg has news about her programme tomorrow morning on BBC One.
As winter approaches, we'll talk to the Health Secretary about the state of the NHS. See you at 9 on BBC One.
And that's all from me and the team. Have a very good night.